Now, one of the subjects that I'm passionate about is using real food in my kitchen. And today I'm going to share a presentation with you that I've done at some local events about why we made the switch from all-purpose flour to fresh ground flour. So we moved to Kentucky last September, and we have a 68-acre off-grid homestead, and on our farm we raise and grow Dexter cows, and I milk my cows. We have a large garden. I like to use real food, and those of you that are in this class, I'm going to assume you are interested in real food also because you're interested in fresh ground flour. Now, on our farm, I do food preservation. I make my own soap. I have some in my booth today for sale. We do all kinds of DIY. My husband is my MacGyver. He keeps everything working for me. And we are a modern off-grid homestead. And what I mean by that is I have a washing machine, and I have no intention of washing my laundry any other way than in my washing machine. So you're definitely going to see modern homestead living on our farm.
And do you have solar?
We do have solar, yep. Now, I didn't tell you this part, but you can see my blog here. You can scan my code, and it'll take you to our blog, kowalskimountain.com. Now, why would you want to grind your own flour? So the reason that I got started in grinding my own flour is because my husband is kind of a prepper, and he wanted to be able to be prepared. Well, if you know anything about flour, it does have an expiration date on it. Most of your flour, they're going to tell you, is good for a year. Now, we all know you probably have flour that's older than a year, and it's going to be good. But wheat berries stored in their forms of wheat are going to be good for 30 years or even longer. So as long as you have properly stored your wheat, this is going to store for decades longer than your store-bought flour. Now, that was why I got into it, because I wanted to meet his prepper side. Now, the other reason that you might get started in grinding your own flour is because you're becoming concerned about what's in your food. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was a little girl, and I'm 51 to give you reference, but if you had a loaf of bread, what would have happened to it, 30 years ago? It would mold. Do you have your bread mold now? No, it doesn't mold. Kids do science experiments on bread, and they can't even make it mold. And that scares me. Why doesn't it mold? It should mold. Now, the other reason that people get into fresh ground flour is because they have health issues. Some people are sensitive to wheat. Some people are sensitive to gluten, and there are truly people that have those concerns. There are also a lot of people who have sensitivities to modern bread. If you buy your bread, they have stomach issues associated with that bread, but they find that they can grind their own flour and they can eat that bread. Now, there are some people who still don't fall into that category. It's a very real concern. So if you do have concerns like that, use it cautiously. Don't jump in too quickly. Now, the other reason that you might want to grind your own flour is because of variety. And honestly, this is my favorite thing. Now, I just brought with me, and I'm sorry they're kind of hidden over there, but I just brought the varieties of wheat that I have. And all of those wheats have different protein contents, which affects your gluten level. They have different flavors. My husband doesn't like nuts in his cookies. I love nuts in my cookies, but I'm a good wife and I don't put nuts in my cookies. But if I put a little bit of spelt in it, spelt tastes nutty. So I get nutty cookies without the nuts. And then we're both happy. And then the other major reason that a lot of people are looking at fresh ground flour is because of nutrition. Now, I saved that for last because we're going to cover it the most thoroughly. Many people are waking up to what's going on in our food. Now, my grandmother cooked from scratch, my mother cooked from scratch, I cooked from scratch. I always did. I was never a convenience food person. But as my kids were growing up in the 90s, the food was really, really changing. It actually started more in the 60s and 70s. Food was really changing, but in the 90s, man, things really ramped up. So even though I was still cooking from scratch, the ingredients that I was putting in my food still wasn't really amazing for my family. And as a mom, that breaks my heart a little bit because I was doing my best. I was doing what I felt was the right thing for my family, and I feel like it wasn't enough, and I was kind of mad about that, honestly, because here I'm going to all this effort to make homemade food, but it's made with bad ingredients, so I could have fed them crap food and had the same, and it probably still was better, but it still upsets me. So those are reasons why we might grind our own flour. Now we're going to spend a little bit of time on this. So the anatomy of a wheat berry. So your wheat berry has four main parts. Here on the outside, you've got your chaff or your hull. We don't eat that part. That part's on the wheat as it grows, and we actually want that to be run through. There's a machine that does this. My mind is blank. I'll think of it. They get rid of all that. You don't want any of that. The next part of your wheat berry is the outer shell of that. That's the bran. That's the hard outside shell of your wheat berry, and that's what protects it. That's what's making it last for 30 years. Now the next part is your endosperm, and this is the part of the wheat that feeds the actual plant, because wheat is a seed. Now this is the germ, and this is where the plant would actually germinate. So our plant germinates here, and it eats this as it's growing until it's nourished by the sun. So what we're going to look at, and the reason I wanted to break this down so much is because I'm a very visual person. So the bran is extremely nutrient dense for you. Now it kind of gets a bad name because it's kind of the hard part of the wheat. When you grind your flour, it's going to be the hardest part inside that wheat, and some people don't like it very much. So, but in that bran, you have all your soluble fiber, your insoluble fiber, your B vitamins, your iron, your digestive enzymes, and your trace minerals. So it's a very nutrient-dense part of the wheat berry. Now the next section, that germ, that's also nutrient dense. It's got essential fatty acids, vitamins E and vitamins B, antioxidants, minerals, and phytonutrients. I'm not sure what a phytonutrient is, but I'm sure it's good for us. Now the next part of the wheat berry is the endosperm. Now this is where your carbs are. This is where your protein is, and your protein is what develops your gluten. And then also has small amounts of B vitamins and minerals. Now just so you know, at the very end, I do have a QR code that you can scan, and I have a bunch of notes for you that I wrote up for you. So that's going to be at the end. So when we look at the wheat berry, the full wheat berry, if I were to eat this like this, and you can take a quarter cup of this, you can cook it in some water, and you can eat it like cereal, like you would rice. This has about 150 calories in a quarter cup. It has less than a gram of fat, 31 grams of protein, and that does depend on what kind of wheat berry you get. They all have different protein counts. It has 5.5 grams of fiber. Now this I find very interesting. Whole wheat contains 40 of the 44 nutrients that you need to survive. And I'm a Christian, and as a believer, Joseph stored up grains. And that is how he saved the nations, because of grains. If you add a little bit of butter to your bread, you add 3 more nutrients, so you have 43 of the 44 nutrients that you need to live. So if the world ends, I'm eating bread and butter, because that's going to give us what we need. Now, conventional flour. Now that I've given you all the stuff about wheat berries and why they're amazing, let's talk about conventional flour. And when I say conventional flour, I mean the kind of flour that you are buying in the grocery store. So commercial milling started around 1910 with the invention of the steel mill, and that made white flour available to everyone. Now before that, white flour was really only for the wealthy. The kings would eat white flour because they wanted soft pastries and soft breads. They didn't want that gritty, heavy bread that has bran in it. They wanted soft flour. Now, one of the things that they learned was when they started milling all of that flour in the mill and selling it, it went bad. And that's because once they broke that bran, the oils inside the wheat start to change the color of it. That's why we have bleached flour, because who wants ugly flour in their biscuits? And it also would go rancid. And so they decided, well, let's take out that bran and the germ out of the flour. They sift it all out, and now they have just the endosperm. That's where your carbs are, a little bit of protein, and just a few vitamins. Now, we watched all those other slides, so you would know all those vitamins and nutrients were in those two parts that we took out. So we're left with basically a flour with very little nutrients. Now, the people who sell us flour, they actually thought this was a pretty good deal, and they started selling the bran and the germ for cattle feed. So the most nutrient-dense parts of the wheat we feed to our animals. Now, the thing that they noticed right away when they started doing this was that health issues quickly skyrocketed. They had three main illnesses that skyrocketed. Two of them were regarding vitamin B deficiencies, and the other was anemia. But the thing that they noticed was that people that were poor didn't have these same problems. Because when you take out the bran and the germ, you're taking out 25% of your wheat. Well, when you're poor, you don't have the money to throw away 25% of your flour. You eat it all. Whether it's soft as you want it or not, you eat it all because you need it. And so those people were healthier because they were getting more nutritious flour. Now, the government and the people who study these things noticed right away that these nutritional deficiencies were from the bread. And they said to the flour companies, you need to put that back. This is not working out. We're making people sick. And they said no. They're making more money. They're selling us flour with not as much nutrition, but they're selling all this bran and germ, and they're making money selling it for animals. So they were like, no, we're not doing that. And it wasn't until 1948, and remember I told you the steel mill started in 1910. It wasn't until 1948 that the government started dictating you're going to put nutrients back in flour. So this is fascinating to me. So this green line right here, this is your nutrition level of whole wheat. If you were to eat it just like I do with my flour. When they took out all the bran and the germ, that went to your pink nutrition levels. So your B vitamins, there's only 11% left in white flour. Your fiber, only 25% left in your flour. And 78% of your protein. And of course, there's a lot more nutrients on here. Now, when the government finally said, you're going to have to enrich this flour, and you might buy enriched flour, so they enriched it to these high amounts out here. And so it's greater than the wheat itself, but how does your body process artificial nutrients? Does it process it the same? No, it doesn't. Now, one of the interesting things about wheat, the other thing that we don't know about it is that flour oxidizes. And oxidation, you may or may not understand that, but you probably understand about an apple. So when I dehydrate an apple, I can make it stop browning. I can stop the oxidation process, and I can preserve that apple in a dry form. That's the same thing as my baking. So if I grind my wheat today and I bake today, I'm gonna lock in those nutrients at 100% of its nutrient level. Now there's probably a little loss in baking, but not enough for me to be worried about. Now, if I were to cut that apple in the first 24 hours, you know it's gonna start to brown a little bit. Well, your flour is gonna lose 45% of your nutrients in the first 24 hours. Now, if you go to 3 days after you have ground your flour, you will have lost 90% of the nutrients. The flour you buy in the grocery store is probably months old. And so it really has very little nutritional value. Now, I don't like to be ugly because like I told you, I was doing the best I could for my family all those years. I have cooked with white flour 45 years. Even if you buy the whole wheat flour, it's still oxidizing. They can't stop that, even if they keep a whole wheat flour. So, in some of the groups I'm in online, they call it dead flour. Now, I don't like to be ugly. You know, this is what it is.
Well, you grind it and make your meat, and it's live flour.
Yes.
And then what is the other?
Right. And people call it dead flour. But just like you, for 45 years, I was baking with dead flour as well. Now, one of the coolest things about grinding your own flour is all the different seeds, because wheat is a seed, is all the different kinds that you can grind. Now, these are the different ones that you have, and I do not know what they all do. We've got wheat and spelt, emmer, millet, rye, buckwheat, corn, einkorn, amaranth, durum wheat, corazan or kamut, I call it kamut for short, barley, quinoa, rice, oats, and sorghum. Depending on the type of mill you get, depends on the types of grains that you can mill in it. Now, all of these have different protein levels, which means they have different gluten levels. They have different flavors. You do different things with them. Like durum wheat, that's a wheat they use for pasta. Of course, we all know what rice, oats. In my mill, I'm not sure about this one. I know this one, you cannot grind oats in it. Corn, I can do in mine. We're going to talk about different ones here. Now, to get you started, when you first get your mill, everyone is kind of overwhelmed, and we also hear a lot about the trendy grains. If you are in any type of health groups, you might have heard of einkorn flour. Einkorn is an ancient grain. We're going to talk about that in a minute. I don't like it, actually. That was one of the very first wheats that I was given with my mill. I got my mill for Christmas one year, and they gave me some grains with it. I don't like einkorn.
Like the taste?
I don't like the flavor, and it also it doesn't have a high gluten structure, so it doesn't make great bread. It makes flat kind of bread. It will rise a little bit, but not a lot, and I didn't like it. So to kind of steer you to where you can get some wheats that you can use, the 2 wheats I recommend that all newcomers start with is hard wheat and soft wheat. Now, hard wheat is the wheat that you're going to use in your yeast breads. It has a high protein. It's going to rise up nicely. And gluten has a bad reputation right now because everyone has gluten sensitivities, but gluten is a good thing. Gluten is what makes your bread light and fluffy. Without gluten, it's going to be like that heavy, flat einkorn loaf that I did not like. You want fluffy bread, so you want a gluten-rich bread. Now, if you have gluten sensitivities, that is a real thing, so still be very careful with that. Now, your hard white wheat berries and your soft come in red and white. Now, your hard red wheat is going to have a very wheaty flavor. It's going to be very bold. And if you don't like whole wheat, you're not going to like hard red wheat. I didn't really like hard red either. It was a little too bold for me. It is probably a little bit more nutritious. They're kind of close in there, but it is probably a little bit more. But if you don't like it, it doesn't really matter if it's a really nutritious bread that you don't eat. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? So I'm sorry?
Half it.
You can half it, you can mix it. And that's actually how I got rid of the hard red that I didn't like, was I just mixed it in with the hard white that I did like, and I didn't notice it at all. It was gone. So my recommendation for your yeast breads is a hard white wheat to start with. Now for everything else, you're gonna want your soft wheats. And again, they come in red and white. I like the soft white wheat. That's what you're gonna use in your cakes. That's what you're gonna use in your biscuits and in your cookies and in your pastries. Oh, what else did I put on there? Oh, cereal, my favorite. Now, one of the benefits of having a grain mill, I never even thought about this, was I love cream of wheat. Now, with this mill, which we're gonna talk about mills in a minute, I can grind my own cream of wheat. I can grind it coarse enough to make my own cream of wheat. I eat it every day. I love it. This mill, not so much. You could, but it's not gonna be not gonna have as much texture. It's gonna be more like flour. The other thing that you might see when you're ordering your wheat is that wheat comes in winter wheat and in spring wheat. So winter wheat is planted in the fall. It goes kind of dormant in the winter, and then it's harvested in the summer. Spring wheat is planted in the spring and harvested in the fall. So it really only has to do with the seasons. It does have a little bit higher protein and a bit of a bolder flavor, but to me it's not a decision point that I only will buy winter wheat. You know, that's just kind of what it is. Now ancient grains, which we already talked a little bit about einkorn, that's kind of trendy right now. Ancient grains have not been modified like modern wheat. Now in the United States, wheat is not genetically modified. Corn is. Wheat is not in the US. Wheat has been bred through normal plant breeding processes, cross-pollination and those types of things, to make it more weed resistant, more pest resistant, to make it shorter, but they didn't genetically modify it to do that. That's just called farming, you know, when you make a crop stronger. It's not done on a microscopic type level. So it's like my chickens. You know, I breed chickens, and I might want a fuzzy little chicken. I might breed it with a fuzzy chicken to make another fuzzy chicken. It didn't change things so much that we've modified it in a way that we don't want it modified. Now, a lot of people with grain sensitivities or gluten sensitivities, you might want to try some of these ancient grains. They are supposed to be a little bit better for that. Now, I don't have any grain sensitivity, so I haven't really delved into, if you're gluten sensitive, which one to pick. Einkorn, I know, is one that people lean to, but when you're making your bread, I recommend you mix these. For one, I'm cheap, honestly. Your ancient grains are more expensive. A bag of soft white wheat, a 50-pound bag, which is how I buy my bags, might run me $35. And I'm guessing off the top of my head here. My Kamut wheat, that's going to cost me $80 for a 50-pound bag. I ration that. I don't make 100% Kamut bread. For one, it's not going to have the gluten structure without that hard white wheat. So I want to mix it to make that fluffy bread, and then it gives that flavor. So my spelt, I'm kind of going out of order here. So spelt, I already told you, has a nutty flavor. I like that in cookies. Again, I don't put it 100%. I mix my spelt and my soft white wheat into my cookies. That makes my spelt last longer, but I still get the nutty flavor of the spelt in my cookies. Now my Kamut has a buttery flavor to it. Kamut is probably my favorite ancient grain, although I'm really falling in love with spelt. I made waffles this week with spelt, and they were so good. So it's going up my list of importance. So with my Kamut, I also mix that with hard white wheat, because I use that in my bread, so I want that to rise. And I mix it about, my particular bread recipe, which I am going to give you today on my website, has 4 cups of hard white wheat in it and 2 cups of kamut is how I mix it to make that go the furthest. Now you can use kamut in tortillas, pancakes, muffins, and my absolute favorite way to eat it is in cream of wheat. It makes the best cream of wheat. I love that. Now einkorn, we've kind of talked about it, and any of these grains you can use them exclusively, but mixing them just makes them behave better. Now let's talk about where to buy your grains, because not that I really looked, but I've never seen wheat berries in Walmart, which in my little town, that's pretty much the only place we have to grocery shop is Walmart. So where do you buy grains? My favorite place to buy grains is at Azure Standard. Now, if you're not familiar with what Azure is a online company that does drop shipments. And they have a website. You go on there, you find a drop shipment close to you. Mine's about 30 minutes from my house. I place my order online. I pay online. It's very secure. And then on my delivery day, which changes, I go to my delivery place and I get my order. They unload the truck. I take my stuff home. We all go home. It is a really great resource for a ton of stuff. If you are into organic cooking, you can get things on there that you are not going to find locally. It has a lot of really great stuff. I tend to only buy staples from there. I buy a lot of spices, baking staples. But there are people at my drop, they must be doing their regular grocery shopping, just watching the boxes that they bring off, because they do all kinds of stuff. Now, my second favorite place to buy grains is Bread Decker. Now, Bread Decker has two avenues. So they have an online store. They actually have an actual store in Georgia, just outside of Atlanta. And my husband likes to travel at night, so we always go through Atlanta in the middle of the night. So I never get to go there, but there is a real store. You can order from breaddecker.com like that. Now I will warn you, the shipping is very high with Bread Decker. Their second option is called Bread Decker Co-op. And they have a second website, and I'm going to have links for these for you at the very end. Bread Decker Co-op works just like Azure, where it's a drop, and you can go pick it up there. Unfortunately, my drop for Bread Decker is 2 hours away, so that's why I switched to Azure, because it's a lot closer for me to go there. Now, I actually liked my grains from Bread Decker better for a couple of reasons. The grains are the same, but when you buy from Bread Decker, their grains all come in buckets, and they also do the big buckets, like a 30-pound bucket. Not a 5-gallon bucket, but it's like a little bit taller than that, holds 30 gallons of grain. But those are already CO2 sealed. So if you are into the prepper side of grains, you don't have to do anything with those. Those are already ready for long-term storage. You don't have to worry about bugs or doing Mylar bags and oxygen absorbers. Those are completely ready to put in your storage and leave them there. Azure's grains do not come like that. They come in bags, and so any grains I buy from Azure, I put everything through the freezer. Now, this is always a big discussion of whether that's necessary or not. When you have food in a warehouse, there are bugs. So I put everything through the freezer. Obviously, I can't put 200 pounds of grains in my freezer at one time, so I do one bag. I leave it in there for 3 or 4 days or till I remember. Then I take it out. I let it completely defrost. It needs to be completely cooled and dried. You don't want to repackage it while it's moist. But once it's come back to room temperature, then I can put it into my buckets. Now, I'm not going to go over all of these. Amazon is another great choice, especially if you're getting started. Everyone gets their mill. They want to mill something right away. Amazon's going to get it to you here a lot faster than everyone else. And usually you can get free shipping on Amazon, which is a big consideration when you're buying grains. Free shipping adds up. If you are lucky enough to have an Amish food store nearby, they carry grains as well. And I was in one recently. I don't remember the name of that town. They said they'd order them for me in bulk. They didn't sell them in bulk, but they'd order them for me. And they got me some prices, and Azure was a better price. So I'm going to stick with Azure. But I have all kinds of other places that you can choose. And I have links to these all on my website, which I'm going to give you guys at the end too.
Well, after you take that grain out of the freezer,
Mhm.
then how are you gonna store it?
I store it in 5-gallon buckets, and I use gamma lids. Do you know what a gamma lid is? So a 5-gallon bucket, it's hard to get the cover on and off,
Oh, right.
you know, yourself. But a gamma lid, you put that tight-fitting seal on just one time, and then it has a lid that comes on and off. I do have some in my booth, because I brought grains. If anyone wants to try fresh milled flour, I can sell limited amounts of grain and grind it for you, so you could take it home. But I have a gamma lid there. And they just screw on and off. Getting them on there is the hardest thing, but you never have to take them off again. I'm not going to, exactly. Now, we live in an RV, so all of my long-term storage is in those kinds of buckets. In my house, I keep them in gallon jars, because that's easier in the pantry.
So, excuse me, with the oxidation process of the freshly ground flour, does freezing affect that at all? So if I freshly grind my flour, can I preserve it a little bit, nutritionally speaking, by sticking that flour straight into the freezer until
Yes.
I'm ready to use it?
Yes,
How, I mean, eventually, I mean, things don't last forever in the freezer.
that's right. You're still going to have oxidation, and you're still
Sure.
going to have degradation. So that's good for short-term solutions.
So like when I grind my, you know I need 5 pounds of flour for the next week and a half or whatever,
That would be fine.
stick it in the freezer.
And I keep it in the fridge. I always have a jar of flour in my fridge. Like, we live in an RV, so I can't keep my mill out all the time. I have to
Right.
take it out every time, put it back every time. That's just my life right now. So I always grind a little extra, and I put that in the fridge. I mix them all together in a jar. I don't care what kind. I use it for roux or whatever.
So you keep your flour or your milled flour refrigerated regardless?
Once it's been milled, yes.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean,
Yes,
okay.
yes. Because of the oils in it, to keep it from
Is
going.
it a significant difference? I mean, the whole point is kind of to grind as needed, not
Yes.
daily, but weekly or
Yes.
so.
Mhm.
Does it make a significant difference with that level of time to do freezer or fridge?
I don't think you're going to have a huge difference.
Sorry,
No.
so stick it in the fridge. Okay.
Yeah, I would. You know, unless you don't have room in the fridge.
Fair enough. Fair
And
enough.
I have a refrigerator full of milk, so that's a really big,
It could be a problem.
it's a really big problem. Okay, so there's 2 main kinds of grain mills. We have a burr mill and we have an impact mill. Now I just got this mill 2 days ago. It just came, so I've actually only used it once. My burr mill, this is my harvest grain mill. This is a stone mill. So burr mills come in 3 kinds. You have a stone mill, which is what I have. And these are synthetic stones, just so you know that. One plate moves, so this one I think is the fixed one, and then the bottom one is the one that moves. And they just fit together, and the wheat is crushed in between. And I can vary the texture of my grains.
Can you use sunflower seeds?
Probably not, because they're oily. You don't want that oil to get into the stones. So I have a turn knob here, so I can change the texture of my grain. So if I want cream of wheat, I make it a little bit coarser. If I want flour, I tighten this down as tight as I can tighten it, because that's how I like it. And I can do as up to cracked corn. Now this mill does all the way to cracked. So it has a much better texture change than this mill. This mill has very limited texture control. Now a stainless steel burr mill, to go back to the sunflower question, can be used with oily or wet grains. So when you're choosing a mill, you want to think about, how am I going to use it? Like, I never even considered I could have cream of wheat, but now I wouldn't buy a mill that I couldn't have cream of wheat with, because I'm spoiled now. I like that. So you want to consider, how am I going to use it? How am I going to cook when you choose one? Now, burr mills are quieter than an impact mill. Now, when I turn this on, this is not quiet. It's loud. It does make a loud noise, but it is quieter. It has, I think I put the decibels up here, 71 to 92 decibels. Now, your burr mills are your only ones that come in a manual form. These are both electric mills. I do not have a manual mill, and that's because manual mills are really expensive, actually, to buy a good one. You can buy a cheap one pretty good, but it's not going to give you a fine flour that you want. There's actually a really nice one. It has a big wheel on it. They do sell a manual mill, and if the world were to end, I might wish I had one. I'm banking on the fact that I live on solar, and hopefully I'll still have power. Now, one thing I want to tell you about a burr mill, and I can tell you this because I made the mistake. I'm all excited. I'm going to mill my first wheat. I fill up my hopper, and I turn it on. It doesn't start. Well, any of you engineered thinking people in the room, if I pour wheat in here, and there's a space in between my stones, where did the wheat just go that I poured in there? It went in between the stones. So when I turn on the power, the stones try to start, but now they're bound up and they can't turn. So with a burr mill, you always start it first and then you pour your wheat in. Otherwise, you're going to have to dump it all out, start all over again.
That's because they're too far apart?
Even when they're close together, they're still going to get in there enough to stop it. And when I tighten this down, I tighten it all the way and then I loosen just a bit because I don't want my stones rubbing together. I don't want stone in my flour, I want flour. Once I turn it on and I put berries in it, I tighten it down tighter to make my finest flour. Now, one of the cons about a burr mill is it may overheat. You have those two stones or metal just rubbing against each other and really close together. So they can overheat. Now the temperatures are not enough to have an effect on your grains, to kill the nutrients in your grains, but you are going to feel a warmer flour. And then the other problem is that your stones can be compacted or glazed over. And once they glaze, they're not going to grind very well.
What does that mean? Like they just lose their texture?
They lose the texture, like it becomes smooth.
Gotcha.
So to clean that, you run some white rice through it. You might have to do that several times to deglaze it and to clean it. And that's the only thing I have to do to clean this is run rice through it. And honestly, I haven't done it in a really long time. So now when I take it apart, like when I took it apart earlier, there's a little bit of flour in there. I can brush it out if I'm being really fussy about it. I don't usually worry about it because I use this every week. At least once a week, if not more than that. So I don't worry about the flour that's in it. It's getting used quickly. Now your other kind of mill is an impact mill. Now I'm an affiliate for Nutrimill. I have their mills that I purchased because I like them. This one they did give to me. Impact mills have a milling chamber. So right in this part of the mill is a milling chamber, and we can't open that up. It's completely sealed. It has concentric rings that fit together, and it pulverizes the wheat at high speeds. So that's why you cannot put anything oily, nothing wet in this because there's no way to clean it out. It's in there. Now you can run rice through this as well, but like this one, I can take it apart, I can brush it out, I can scrape it off, whatever, with a brush. This one, you can't do that. This mill is louder. It sounds like a vacuum cleaner. I didn't think it was offensively loud, but it was loud after a while. Yesterday, now I just got this, so I've only used it really once. And I'm learning to use the texture controls and things of it. And it ran for like 10 minutes. And I'm like, after 10 minutes, I need ear protection using this machine. The next time I did it, I ran it on a higher coarseness setting and it ran right through super fast. And I was like, okay, I can deal with that kind of noise. Impact grills are only electric. You cannot manually spin this fast enough to make it work. So that is not, if you're looking for manual, this is not your machine. And then the other thing about this is it has less texture control. Now I found that on the #1 setting, super fine. I felt like this mill made finer flour than this mill. My husband is actually really excited because he struggles with the grainy of the bread. It took me over a year to convert him to fresh milled bread because it's not light and fluffy like Wonder Bread. I told him it's better, but he likes light and fluffy, and it does take time to learn that. Now, Nutrimill does have another impact mill. It's bigger than this one. Now, I'm super excited about this machine, and the main reason is because of the price point. I learned about fresh milled flour probably 15 years ago. I had some friends who were homeschoolers. They heard Sue Becker talk, and I don't know if any is familiar with Sue Becker. I learned a lot about nutrition of wheat from her. She is a food scientist. She worked for companies like Kraft. She has spent 30 years learning about whole grains. So if you want to know anything about nutrition, Google Sue Becker. She's going to teach you that information. But back then, when my friends were doing it, I was a single mom with 3 kids. I could not afford a $400 mill.
Yeah.
I wanted to do the best for my kids, and putting food on the table was the best I could do. I couldn't choose that it was fresh ground. This mill is $199, and I feel like this mill is going to make it possible for people who couldn't mill grains before to do it now. Because I could save up $200. I would have done that. But to save up, almost $500 by the time you buy other things that go with it, that was a stretch for me as a single mom with 3 kids, and it was out of my reach. So that's why I'm super excited about this mill. Now, how do you choose which mill you're going to get? Well, what do you want to do with the grain? So if all you want to do is make bread and cookies, then either one's going to do that job. If you want a really, really fine flour, I felt like this has a finer flour than this one. Honestly, I was a little bit romanticized by the stone ground flour. I loved Little House on the Prairie and watching Pa go to the mill and get his flour. I could do that at home. I was very romanticized by my stone mill. Do you want to grind wet or oily grains? You want to be really careful what you choose based on that question. Is aesthetic appeal important to you? Now, you're likely going to use your mill a lot more if it's on the counter and you don't have to get it out every time, because trust me, it's a pain to get it out every time. That's what I have to do. I actually keep it in the box to keep it safe. So does it matter how pretty it is? How much room does it take on your counter space? This one takes up quite a bit more because of its flour collection chamber. And biggest question of all, what's your budget? There are other companies, there are gorgeous mills on the market, but they are not cheap. I mean, and we're talking up on the $600 range on some of these mills. So, of course, that is a really big question. Now that I have given you all the reasons that you should use fresh ground flour, and I've made you feel like this is important, now I'm going to teach you about it, and that this is a different animal. If you have been baking with conventional flour for any amount of time, it is not going to behave like fresh ground flour. I am 51. I have been baking since I was 8 years old for the 4-H county fair. I made some pretty good biscuits when I was 8 years old. I have made some really awful things with my fresh milled flour because it does not behave the same. You can make some heavy loaves of bread. And my daddy was a lot more understanding than my husband. My daddy ate a lot of bad biscuits. So one of the things you want to learn right off the bat, that 1 cup of wheat berries is not equal to 1 cup of flour. And this is an example. So this is 1 cup of wheat berries in the jar. This is that same 1 cup of berries ground into flour. You can see that it's a lot fluffier. Now, if you measure your grains, a lot of recipes designed for fresh milled flour are based on grams. And if a recipe calls for 350 grams of wheat berries, then 350 grams of flour is going to weigh exactly the same. And that's actually a little bit easier of a way to not grind too much flour by weight. I guess I'm old school. I always do it by volume measurements just because I'm used to cups. Now I want to encourage you that if you do try to make a switch to fresh ground flour, use recipes designed for fresh ground flour. They are going to understand the animal. They're going to make sure that you're going to be successful. My two favorite places, now I have a blog, kowalskimountain.com. I have a few recipes on my blog. I'm not a food blogger. That's so much stress. I'm not a food blogger. But my friend Kara has a blog called Grains in Small Places. She makes wonderful recipes, and they are all by weight. She's one I highly recommend. The other one is Bread Becker. Sue Becker has been doing this for decades. She has very good recipes. I have Sue's book here. This is the Homegrown Flour book. She talks about a lot of things about wheat and choosing your grains and protein content and nutrition. She has a really good video on nutrition if you want to watch it. It is 3 hours long. It is very long. But if I haven't convinced you that fresh ground flour is better for you, she definitely will.
Her husband lost 75 pounds when she switched.
Did he?
Some health problems.
Yes. And she tells amazing stories about health changes. Now, I can't say that Philip and I have had amazing health changes from switching our flour, but we were already eating as healthy as we could before. So I already wasn't using any convenience foods. I wasn't using seed oils. We already raised our own meat. So switching the flour was just another layer of it. We were already eating well before. So I don't let that bother me. I know I'm still doing the best. Now the other thing I wanted to tell you, grind your flour when you need it. You're going to get the most nutrient-dense flour by doing so. And like we talked about, you can freeze it, you can put it in the refrigerator. If you want to grind once a week, especially Nutrimill has another mill called the Classic. It does higher volume. You can mill flour once a week, use it in the week. That's going to be okay. I would put it in the fridge or freezer to preserve it, to slow that oxidation. Now my flour that's left over, no matter what I make, I keep a jar in my fridge. Anything left over from the day goes in the jar. I don't care if it's spelt, hard white, soft white. If I need to make a roux, I use whatever's in the jar. If I like country fried venison and I bread my venison with my flour, I don't care what it is, whatever's in the jar. That's how I use up all those little extra amounts left over for whatever I'm going to do. I use that for dusting my countertops. It doesn't matter if there's soft wheat and the flour I dust on my countertop when I'm making a yeast bread. It's not going to be enough soft white to affect the change in my yeast bread. It's going to be perfectly fine. And sometimes I don't grind enough, so I just go to my little jar and I make up the difference. Now the other thing I wanted to tell you is to properly store your bread products, because these are going to mold. And they're going to mold faster than you expect because you're used to bread not molding. And so you're going to go, my gosh, this molded so quickly, what happened? So how do I do that? Philip and I are empty nesters. There's only the two of us at home. I was going to bring my Pullman pan. I love this pan. I have a 13-inch Pullman pan. It's long and it has a lid. The reason I like that is because it makes a perfectly square loaf of bread. Now we use this for our sandwich. Now my husband did not like it. You know, sometimes the loaf rises up really high. And so then you have these really tall sandwiches. Or you have a bread pan that's really wide. Maybe it's, 5 inches wide or 6 inches wide. Then you've got this huge sandwich. The Pullman pan makes the perfect square bread. And so what I do is I cook it in that pan. I have a slicer. I slice it with an electric knife. So much better. You're going to get nice clean cuts. And my cutting guide makes the same every time, because who likes a piece of bread where it's really thick on one side and halfway on the other side? Cutting guide. My daddy always said when I was a kid, the right tools make the job better. And I used to think that he just liked tools, but now I know he was right. It makes the job easier. So I slice it, and then I take 2 pieces of bread, I wrap them in saran wrap. I don't use Ziplocs because that's more expensive, just plain saran wrap. I put that right in the freezer. I don't do anything extra because we eat it fast enough. It's not going to get freezer burnt, but it's going to last longer than several days that it would normally. Now, if you have a larger family, you might use it a lot faster than us, but we don't use it fast enough. After you've started learning how to bake with fresh ground flour with recipes that were designed for that, and I highly recommend, you will feel more success because it's discouraging to have some ugly baked goods. But when you start converting it, the rule of thumb is to add 1/4 cup for every cup in the recipe. So if you have a recipe that calls for 2 cups of flour, you're going to add a 1/2 cup. Now, why would you do that? The flour that you buy in the store is packed tightly in that bag, and it's traveled all over the country, and it's all packed together. When I grind my flour fresh, it's fluffy. It takes up more space. So you want to put in a little bit more flour than you would in your recipe. Now, if you use a recipe, now your conventional recipes are probably not by grams, but maybe they are. Grams are equal. So you can always do equal when it's done in weight. Now, another technique that I learned when I'm making bread, I like to autolaze my bread. Do you let your bread autolaze?
No, I don't know what that
Do you
is.
do what?
Autolaze means I let my bread rest. So what I do is in the morning or even the night before I will do this. If I have a really busy day, I do it the night before. I mix up everything in the recipe except the yeast. Leave the yeast out. Just mix it up. We're not kneading right now. We're just mixing it. And then you let it rest. You want to let it autolaze at least 30 minutes. I let mine for 2 hours, and that's because my husband's picky. Remember, he didn't like the fresh ground flour bread because it wasn't as soft and fluffy. Letting it autolaze or soak and let it absorb all the moisture in there is going to soften the bran. It's going to soften the flour, and you're going to get a better, lighter texture. I never skip autolaze. I always do it for 2 hours, mostly because I'm really trying to make him happy.
And it doesn't mess with the way that the bread comes together as bread to add the yeast after you've created the dough?
No, because your yeasts, there's 2 kinds of yeast. There's instant yeast, and then there's, what's the other one?
Pasteurized or whatever.
Right, you just sprinkle it on top. It doesn't, you don't have to mix it into the water. Now, now the one, and I didn't write down which is which. If you did do the one that has to be mixed into the water, because there is one that has to be
which is, what I usually use.
reserve a little bit of the water from the recipe to mix into the yeast.
Oh, and then just mix it in, and then
Yes.
then you probably need to adjust a little, like add a little extra flour as needed to adjust to get the dough consistency.
Possibly, yes.
But the bulk of it would have been
Yes.
autolyzed.
Do you
Is
need
that the
it?
word?
What do I what?
Do you need it after you sprinkle it on?
Yes, after it's autolazed for the 2 hours is what I do. I sprinkle the yeast on top, then I knead it. Now I usually knead my bread about 10 minutes. People that do fresh ground flour, everyone's talking about the window pane. Has anyone ever heard about window pane?
Yeah.
Okay, so window pane means that your dough is stretching enough that you can kind of see through it. Because it's so stretchy that it doesn't tear. This is my opinion, maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. I don't try to look for a pretty little window pane. I've been making bread long enough that I know what kneaded bread feels like. It has a softness to it. And if you've made bread before, that's what you're looking for. You're looking for that soft texture. If you want to do your little window pane,
You could feel, you go, oh, this is going to be a good loaf.
yes, you can feel it in the bread dough. Now, if you don't have experience, maybe those are some things to help you learn. If you try to stretch that dough and it just tears all apart, it's not ready. As long as your bread has a nice stretch to it, or your dough does, then you know it's going to be ready.
Did you talk about gluten already?
A little bit.
Like if dough will still stick together without gluten, or is it just, it's because it contains the word glue that I think that means that the dough is stickier.
The gluten, it creates the stretchiness of it. It's the protein in the bread that makes your gluten, and that does cause the stretch. So a lower protein grain will not stretch as much. Like my einkorn wheat berries are lower in protein, So they are not going to have that stretchy gluten because they're lower in gluten than like a hard wheat.
So you have to make it thicker.
It is going to be denser, or you need to mix your grains. You mix a little bit of hard white in it too. And then the other thing, I do add gluten to my bread. The recipe called for it, I've always done it, and it just gives it a little extra help, you know. So, but you don't have to, that's completely optional to add gluten to your recipes. And you know, gluten is a good thing. In bread, we want gluten because it makes it stretch. When you're making cookies, I like to shape my cookies into little balls or whatever they are and then chill it. That makes a really big difference. A lot of cookies made with fresh milled flour, if they go right into the oven, they tend to be a little bit on the flat side, and the chilling really helps with that. What you don't want to do is keep adding flour because then they're going to be too dense. Now, because we're empty nesters, I freeze most of my cookies. I will make my little cookie balls and I put those in the freezer. And then I only cook 2 dozen when I make them. Rather than make 10 dozen cookies, which we don't eat 10 dozen cookies this week, I put them in the freezer and then every week I make a dozen and we have fresh cookies all the time rather than all at once. That's one of my favorite tricks to use in my cookies.
Freeze the dough?
I freeze the dough and I don't defrost them. I pull them out of the oven, put them on, pull them out of the freezer, put them right on the tray and right into the oven. No defrosting.
But you ball them up first.
I ball them, yeah.
So she's making them in a little bit, because I've done this very recently.
Yeah.
For my own reasons, but, yeah, if they're already in the balls and you let them freeze as the balls,
Yeah.
then yeah, you can pull them apart. They're just like the ones you get in the store.
Yeah, and some people do like the round loaf and they just slice and just freeze the slices. You know, you can do it either way. Now making your quick breads, because quick breads are made with soft white wheat, they don't need that long autolays like a hard white wheat because it's not as hard. But I do find it benefits from 15 to even 30 minutes of rest. 15 is probably fine, like the waffles I made the other day. I mixed them up, then I went ahead and did whatever and came back and made them 15 minutes later. And that is sufficient. Now my words to the wise. My number 1 word to you is use your mill. It's intimidating when you start doing this and discouraging if you make some really bad biscuits. You know, it's not fun, especially when, I'm a very experienced baker. It's very discouraging when you make terrible biscuits. But use your mill. Even if you only want to do a mill for a preparedness reason, you want to use it because otherwise you will not be prepared to use it later. Prepare yourself also that working with fresh milled flour is different. Accept the fact that it takes time to learn a new skill. And part of learning a new skill is failure. And you know what? Flat, failed cookies still taste good. It's not all lost. And then the other big thing, what if your family doesn't like it? Now, it took me a year to convert my husband. I make 100% of our bread products. You saw my hamburger bun up there, but I make all of our bread. It took me a year to convert him because it wasn't as soft and it wasn't the same. And I said, no, you're right, it's better. But he didn't agree. And then finally, we both quit our jobs when we moved here and we live in a really limited budget. And so when I went into the store and I bought 2 loaves of bread and it cost me $9, I said, you're going to eat this bread because that's all there's going to be. And that was the end of that.
Necessity is the mother of
That's exactly right. So how do you convert your family? My suggestion, if you're going to convert your family, start small. Make a recipe. Only use 25% of fresh milled flour. Use 75% of your conventional flour. And then wean them over. Before you know it, they didn't notice that it changed. Another thing I did with my bread, because my husband wanted soft bread, you can add sunflower lecithin, and you can probably say that better than me, lecithin. Lecithin, thank you. You can add that to your bread and it will soften it. Now what I did for my husband was I bought 1 bag of it, and when I ran out, I didn't buy more. But by then I had convinced him that it was better. And I told him that's what we're going to eat, so that worked either way.
Was there a proportion that you used of the sunflower lecithin?
I think it's only like 2 teaspoons in the whole recipe. I'm going to give you resources in a minute. My bread recipe is on there that I use. All right, so here's your conversion. So the conversion chart is free on my website. This will tell you if you need 1 cup of flour, how much wheat to grind to get 1 cup of flour. And then this is the same QR code on both pages. You can scan that. That's going to take you to my blog. It's going to have all the resources I talked about, where to buy your grains. I have some posts on my blog about how to use flour, how to choose a mill, all that stuff. I have all of my affiliate links. If you're interested in a mill, I am an affiliate for Nutrimill, and we do make a commission on that. And I also have a discount code, KMBakers20. That will save you $20. And then on those resources, we go over all the stuff on the mills again. I know I covered a lot of information very fast today.
Have you ever or considered trying a MagiMix to grind your grains?
I have not. A lot of people do
I
that.
know it takes a different blade and different.
And most people say it doesn't give the same fineness. Now you can still make stuff out of it, but it's not going to be the same. A lot of people also consider putting like a grinding attachment on your KitchenAid. For one, it's a lot of wear and tear on your machine that you probably already use a lot. But it also isn't going to have the same kind of fineness. Like this mill, I did a review on this, posted to YouTube just this morning. This had really nice flour. I was really impressed with this mill's fineness of flour. So you're welcome to come up and look at the grains, and I appreciate you listening, and thanks for coming.